The hall went silent the moment Damien Cross raised Elena Ashford's wrist in front of the entire Silverwood pack. Firelight flickered across hundreds of watching faces, but Elena only saw one thing: the cold look in her mate's eyes. 3 years ago, that same hand had held hers gently, while the Luna seal burned itself into her skin. Tonight, his fingers closed around her wrist like a stranger's, and the warmth she once knew was gone. "This mark no longer belongs to you," Damien said, his voice carrying across the stone hall. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought the whole pack could hear it. She searched his face for some sign that this was a mistake, a nightmare she would wake from, but his jaw was set, his eyes distant. Behind him, Seraphine stood wrapped in a fur cloak that did not belong to her, tears sliding down her cheeks, as though she were the one being wronged. "Damien, please," Elena whispered. "Talk to me. Whatever she told you, it isn't true." "Don't," he said, and the word cut deeper than any blade. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Harder than it already is. As if he were the one suffering, Elena looked past him to the crowd, searching for a friendly face, someone who might step forward and stop this madness. She found only lowered eyes and folded arms. Even Grace, who had stood beside her since the day she arrived at Silverwood, stared at the floor. The elder of the pack, an old wolf named Nathan Reed who had overseen every important ceremony for 2 decades, stepped forward with visible reluctance. In his hands he carried the ceremonial blade used only once before, on the night Elena became Luna. Now it would be used to undo everything that Night had built. "Alpha Cross," Nathan said carefully. "Are you certain? Once broken, a Luna seal cannot simply be restored. The bond will scar. This is not a decision to make in anger." "I am not angry," Damien said, though his voice shook slightly as he said it. "I am doing what is right for this pack." Seraphine let out a soft sob at exactly that moment, and Damien's eyes flicked toward her, softening instantly. Elena watched the exchange and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had seen this pattern for weeks now, the way Seraphine's tears seemed to control her mate, more surely than any command from the pack elders. "She lied to you," Elena said, louder now, desperation breaking through her composure. "The shipment records, the missing silver, none of that was me. Ask yourself why the only proof came from her." "Enough," Damien snapped. "I have seen the evidence with my own eyes." "You've seen what she wanted you to see." Seraphine pressed a hand to her chest, as if the accusation itself had wounded her. "I only ever wanted to help this pack," she said, her voice trembling beautifully, rehearsed in a way only Elena seemed to notice. "I never asked to come between you both." Elena wanted to scream that this was exactly what she had asked for, that every tear was a performance, but the words caught in her throat as Nathan Reed stepped closer with the blade. The old wolf's hands trembled slightly, betraying his discomfort with the task in front of him. "Elena Ashford," he said formally, though his eyes carried an apology his mouth could not speak. "By the will of your Alpha, your title as Luna of Silverwood is hereby revoked." The blade touched the silver mark on her wrist, and pain shot up her arm like fire. Elena bit back a cry, refusing to give Seraphine the satisfaction of watching her break completely. The mark, once a symbol of belonging, split apart under the blade, and with it came a tearing sensation deep inside her chest, as though the bond connecting her to Damien was being ripped out by the root. She staggered back, cradling her wrist, blood mixing with the silver dust that had once made her Luna. The pack around her shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others staring with open curiosity, as if she were nothing more than an interesting spectacle. "You will leave Silverwood before sunrise," Damien said, not meeting her eyes now. "Take nothing that carries the pack crest. This is no longer your home." Elena straightened her spine despite the pain radiating through her arm. She would not crumble in front of these people, not in front of Seraphine, who was already leaning into Damien's side as though she had won something precious. "You will regret this," Elena said quietly, and though her voice did not rise, it carried through the silent hall with a weight that made even Damien flinch. "Not because I curse you, but because the truth always finds its way home." She turned before anyone could respond and walked out of the hall, her steps steady even as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. Behind her, She heard Seraphine's soft, satisfied breathing, and the murmur of a pack already beginning to forget she had ever been their Luna. The night air outside was sharp and cold, biting through the thin dress she still wore from what was supposed to be an ordinary evening. Only hours ago, she had been preparing dinner in the Alpha's house, humming to herself, unaware that her entire world was about to collapse. Now she stood outside the gates of the only home she had known for 3 years, watching her breath fog in front of her, utterly alone. She thought back to how it all began, though the memory felt distant now, as if it belonged to someone else's life. Seraphine had arrived on a rainy afternoon 3 months earlier, drenched and sobbing at the pack's border, claiming her own pack had cast her out after a failed mating bond. Damien, ever protective of those in need, had welcomed her without hesitation. Elena remembered feeling sympathy for the woman at first, offering her clothes, food, a place to stay, until she found her footing. She had not expected that kindness to become the very weapon used against her. Slowly, subtly, Seraphine had woven herself into pack life. She learned the names of every wolf within days, charmed the elders with her manners, and always seemed to appear exactly when Damien needed comfort or advice. Elena noticed the changes first in small things, the way Damien's schedule filled with meetings that somehow always included Seraphine, the way his laughter, once reserved for Elena alone, now came easily in another woman's presence. When she raised her concerns, Damien dismissed them as jealousy, an accusation that stung more than she let show. She had never been a jealous person, but watching her mate slowly slip away toward someone else awakened a fear she did not know how to voice without sounding exactly like what he accused her of being. Then came the missing silver shipment, a valuable resource the pack traded with neighboring territories for medicine and supplies. Seraphine had been the one to discover the discrepancy in the records, and somehow, impossibly, every trail led back to Elena's private ledger. Elena had protested her innocence with everything she had, but the evidence, forged as she now suspected, was damning enough to plant doubt in Damien's mind. Doubt that grew, day by day, fed carefully by Seraphine's gentle suggestions and well-timed tears. Standing outside the gates now, Elena realized how skillfully she had been outmaneuvered. She had spent weeks defending herself against accusations, while Seraphine spent those same weeks quietly dismantling every bond of trust Elena had built over 3 years. A rustle in the nearby trees caught her attention, and she turned sharply, her instincts still sharp despite the pain and exhaustion weighing on her. Grace stepped out from the shadows, glancing nervously back toward the pack hall as though afraid of being seen. "I couldn't say anything in there," Grace whispered, pressing a small bundle into Elena's hands. Inside were a warm cloak, a pouch of coins, and a strip of dried meat. "The Alpha would have punished anyone who spoke in your defense. Seraphine has ears everywhere now." "Thank you," Elena said, her voice hoarse. "You didn't have to risk this." "You were the best Luna this pack ever had," Grace said fiercely. "I don't believe for 1 second that you stole anything. Something is wrong with all of this, Elena. I just don't know what yet." Elena squeezed her friend's hand, grateful beyond words for even this small kindness in a night that had stripped her of everything else. "Be careful," she warned. "If she's willing to do this to me, she won't hesitate to turn on anyone who stands in her way." Grace nodded, tears glistening in her eyes before she disappeared back toward the pack hall, leaving Elena alone once more with the vast darkness of the forest ahead of her. Elena pulled the cloak tightly around her shoulders and began to walk, no destination in mind, except away from the pack that had once been her family, away from the mate who had chosen tears over truth. Her wrist throbbed where the seal had been torn, a physical reminder of everything she had lost in a single, devastating night. As she walked deeper into the trees, the adrenaline that had carried her through the humiliation of the ceremony began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache that settled deep in her chest. She thought of the years she had given to Silverwood, the disputes she had settled, the sick she had tended, the trust she had built with pack members who now would not meet her eyes. All of it, undone in a single evening by a stranger's calculated tears. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's howl rose into the night, and for a moment, Elena wondered if it was Damien, mourning what he had done, or simply marking territory that no longer included her. She did not stop walking to find out. Hours passed as she moved through unfamiliar terrain, the forest thickening around her until the moon was barely visible through the canopy above. Exhaustion pulled at every muscle, but stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the look on Damien's face as he tore the seal from her wrist. She preferred the numbness of movement, one foot in front of the other, putting distance between herself and the ruins of her old life. Near dawn, her legs finally gave out beneath her, and she sank down against the base of an ancient oak tree, too exhausted to go further. The forest was quiet here, far from Silverwood's borders, in territory she did not recognize. She wrapped the cloak Grace had given her tighter around her shoulders and closed her eyes, telling herself she would only rest for a moment. Sleep found her quickly, pulling her down into dreams tangled with fire and silver, and the sound of Seraphine's soft, victorious laughter. She woke to the sound of footsteps. Elena's eyes snapped open, every instinct screaming danger even before her mind fully registered the figure standing several feet away, watching her with cautious interest. An old woman leaned on a wooden staff, her silver hair pulled back in a braid, her eyes sharp despite the deep lines etched into her face by age. "You're a long way from Silverwood territory," the woman said, her voice rough but not unkind. "And judging by that wound on your wrist, I'd guess you didn't leave by choice." Elena scrambled to her feet, tensing despite her exhaustion. "Who are you?" "Someone who's seen enough broken Luna seals to recognize one from 20 paces, the woman replied, her gaze flicking briefly to Elena's injured wrist before returning to her face. "My name is Mara. I run a small pack near the old silver mines, about 2 hours from here. You look like you could use a place to sit and eat something that isn't tree bark." Elena hesitated, every lesson about caution with strangers warring against the sheer exhaustion pulling at her body. But something in Mara's steady gaze felt honest in a way Damien's had not been in weeks. "Why would you help someone you don't even know?" Elena asked. Mara's expression softened slightly, though it did not fully lose its edge. "Because a long time ago, someone helped me when I had nothing left either. Come on, girl. The mines aren't far, and there's a storm coming that neither of us wants to be caught in." Elena looked back the way she had come, toward Silverwood, toward the life that no longer wanted her, and then forward, toward the unknown path Mara offered. There was nothing left behind her worth returning to. She followed the old woman into the trees, unaware that this small, unplanned meeting would eventually unravel every lie that had destroyed her life in a single, devastating night. The 2 hours to Mara's territory passed in near silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant rumble of thunder building somewhere over the mountains. Elena studied the old woman as they walked, noticing the confident way she moved through the forest, clearly familiar with every root and rise in the terrain. There was something in her bearing that spoke of authority once held and perhaps still carried, despite the modest surroundings she now called home. "You said you run a pack near the silver mines," Elena finally said, breaking the silence. "I've never heard of a pack settling that close to old mining territory. Most wolves avoid it because of the silver contamination in the soil." Mara's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Most wolves also avoid a lot of things out of fear rather than sense. The mines have been abandoned for over a decade. What contamination remains is manageable, if you know how to work around it. Besides, there aren't many places left where a pack like mine can settle without interference from larger territories. "A pack like yours?" "Rogues," Mara said simply. "Wolves who've been cast out. Wolves who never wanted the politics of a large pack. Wolves who simply needed somewhere quiet to rebuild. We don't have an alpha in the traditional sense. We make decisions together, as equals. It works better than you might expect." Elena considered this as they continued walking, the concept foreign to everything she had known within Silverwood's rigid hierarchy. "And you're not worried about wolves from larger packs causing trouble?" "We're worried about plenty of things," Mara admitted, "but we've learned to handle ourselves. Besides, most large packs consider the mines cursed ground. Bad memories tend to linger there, and wolves are superstitious creatures at heart." They crested a small hill, and below them, nestled into a valley surrounded by rocky outcroppings, Elena saw the settlement Mara had described. It was smaller than Silverwood, perhaps 30 or 40 wolves at most, their homes built from salvaged timber and stone rather than the polished architecture she was accustomed to. Despite its rough appearance, there was something warm about the scene below. Smoke curling from chimneys, children chasing each other between houses, the distant sound of laughter carrying up the hillside. "It's not much," Mara said, watching Elena's reaction carefully. "But it's honest. Everyone here has a story similar to yours, one way or another. You'll fit in better than you might expect." As they descended toward the settlement, Elena felt the weight of the past night finally beginning to settle into something she could examine, rather than simply endure. Her wrist still ached where the seal had been torn away, but for the first time since Damien's hand had closed around it in judgment rather than affection, she allowed herself to wonder what came next. She did not know yet that the answer to that question was buried deep within the abandoned silver mines below Mara's settlement, waiting patiently in old records and forgotten ledgers for someone determined enough to find it. The settlement welcomed Elena with a mixture of curiosity and quiet understanding that surprised her. Word spread quickly among the rogue wolves that a stranger had arrived bearing the unmistakable mark of a broken Luna seal, but instead of the judgment she braced herself for, she found something closer to recognition. Many of these wolves carried their own scars, visible and otherwise, from packs that had discarded them for reasons ranging from unfair to unforgivable. A young woman named Charlotte, who Mara introduced as the settlement's healer, examined Elena's wrist with gentle hands and careful attention. "The wound will heal clean," Charlotte assured her, applying a poultice that smelled of crushed herbs and something faintly metallic. "But the bond scar will remain. That's not something any medicine can fix. It's part of you now, whether you want it or not." "How long have you lived here?" Elena asked, watching the younger woman work. "Since I was 16, Charlotte said without looking up. "My birth pack decided I was more useful as a bargaining chip in a territory dispute than as an actual member of the family. Mara found me wandering half-starved near the old quarry and brought me here. I've been patching up broken wolves ever since." Elena absorbed this information quietly, beginning to understand the pattern of the community around her. Every face she encountered in the following days carried a similar story. Wolves who had been failed by the very packs meant to protect them, who had found in this rough, unglamorous settlement something more valuable than status or comfort. They had found belonging without conditions. Over the following week, Elena settled into a rhythm that felt strange after years of Luna duties within Silverwood's rigid structure. Here, everyone contributed according to their abilities rather than their rank. She found herself helping repair fences, tending to the small gardens that supplemented the settlement's food supply, and slowly, cautiously, beginning to trust the people around her. Mara watched her progress with quiet approval, though she rarely offered direct praise. The old woman seemed to understand that Elena needed purpose more than pity, work more than sympathy. It was during one of these ordinary afternoons, while Elena helped sort through supplies in the settlement's storage building, that Mara finally asked the question that had clearly been building since their first meeting. "Tell me about the woman who took your place," Mara said, settling onto an overturned crate as Elena continued her work. "The one your alpha chose over you." Elena's hands stilled on the crate she had been organizing. "Her name is Seraphine. She arrived at Silverwood 3 months ago, claiming her own pack had cast her out. Damien took her in, and somehow, within weeks, she had convinced him I was responsible for a missing silver shipment. I never even saw the evidence she claimed to have found. By the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late to stop it." Mara's expression had grown increasingly still as Elena spoke, a tension building behind her eyes that had nothing to do with disbelief and everything to do with recognition. "Seraphine," she repeated slowly. "Does she have pale hair, almost silver, and a habit of touching her collarbone when she's about to say something she doesn't quite believe herself?" Elena stared at the old woman, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the cool storage building. "You know her?" "I know of a woman who matches that description," Mara said carefully. "Years ago, before I settled here, I served as an elder in a pack near the eastern border. A young woman joined our ranks under similar circumstances, claiming to be fleeing an abusive mate. She was charming, sympathetic, everything a grieving pack wanted to protect. Within a year, our alpha's mate had been discredited and cast out over accusations of theft, very similar to what you've described." Elena's pulse quickened. "What happened to her?" The Luna who was cast out? She disappeared, Mara said grimly. No one ever found out what became of her. And the woman who replaced her, the one everyone believed was innocent, vanished herself less than 2 years later, along with a significant portion of the pack's stored wealth. By then, the damage to that pack was already irreversible. Trust had been shattered so thoroughly that the pack splintered into smaller factions within a year of her disappearance. Elena sat down slowly on a nearby crate, her mind racing to process this information. You think it's the same woman? I couldn't say for certain without more evidence, Mara admitted. It's been many years, and I only saw her a handful of times before I left that pack myself. But the pattern you're describing is unsettling in its familiarity. A woman arrives claiming victimhood, ingratiates herself with the Alpha, and orchestrates the downfall of the existing Luna through fabricated evidence. If this is the same person, she's had a great deal of practice perfecting her methods. The implications settled heavily over Elena as she considered what this meant. If Seraphine had done this before, successfully, then Silverwood was not simply the victim of one woman's jealousy or ambition. It was the latest target in what might be a long pattern of calculated destruction, one that had likely left other packs shattered in its wake. I need to know more, Elena said, determination beginning to burn away some of the exhaustion that had settled into her bones since the night of her exile. If she's done this before, there might be records somewhere, proof of what happened to those other packs, proof that could show Damien the truth. Mara studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. The old mining records might hold something useful. Before the mines were abandoned, they served as a trading post for several territories in this region, including, if I recall correctly, the pack I once served. Correspondence between packs often passed through here for verification and record-keeping. If your Seraphine left a trail anywhere, it might be buried in those archives. Can you show me where to look? I can do better than that, Mara said, rising from the crate with more energy than Elena had seen from her since their initial meeting. I can show you the archives myself. I helped catalog some of those records myself, decades ago, before the silver contamination forced the mining operation to close. If the information exists, we'll find it together. The following morning, Mara led Elena down into the abandoned mines for the first time, carrying lanterns that cast flickering shadows against walls still marked with old support beams, and rusted equipment left behind when the operation ceased. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying the faint metallic scent that gave the mines their name, and Elena found herself grateful for the warm cloak Grace had given her that fateful night. The archive room is deeper in, Mara explained, her voice echoing softly against the stone walls. The mining company kept extensive records of every transaction that passed through this trading post, back when this region served as neutral ground for packs that couldn't meet directly due to territorial disputes. It's been years since anyone bothered to look through them properly. They walked for nearly 20 minutes through the winding tunnels, Mara navigating with the confidence of someone who had traveled this path countless times before. Eventually, they reached a heavy wooden door, its hinges rusted but still functional, leading into a chamber lined with shelves upon shelves of aging documents, ledgers, and correspondence bundled with fraying twine. This is going to take time, Mara warned, setting her lantern on a nearby table. The records aren't organized by name or pack, unfortunately. They're organized by date, which means we'll need to work through years of documents to find anything relevant to your time frame. Elena looked around the vast chamber, the weight of the task ahead settling over her, but beneath the exhaustion, she felt something else stirring, a determination she had not experienced since the earliest days of her mating bond with Damien, back when she still believed in fighting for things worth protecting. Then we start today, Elena said, reaching for the nearest shelf of documents. I have nothing but time now, and every reason in the world to find out exactly who Seraphine really is. As they began the painstaking work of sorting through decades of forgotten records, Elena could not have known how many hours, days, and eventually weeks this search would demand. Nor could she have imagined the full scope of what those records would eventually reveal, not just about Seraphine's history, but about the depth of manipulation that had brought her to this moment, exiled from everything she once called home. Back in Silverwood, unaware of the investigation quietly building against her in the depths of an abandoned mine, Seraphine settled comfortably into the role Elena had once occupied. She moved through the Alpha's house with practiced ease, rearranging furniture, adjusting schedules, slowly erasing every trace of the Luna who had come before her. Damien watched her with the same guilty affection that had clouded his judgment for weeks, unaware that the woman he had chosen to trust was far more dangerous than the one he had cast aside. That evening, as Elena and Mara continued their search by lantern light deep within the mountain, Seraphine sat across from Damien at dinner, her expression carefully arranged into gentle concern. "You've been quiet all evening," she said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "Are you having second thoughts about what happened?" Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I did what was necessary for the pack." "Of course you did," Seraphine agreed quickly, though something flickered behind her eyes that no one at the table noticed. "You're a good alpha, Damien. You always put the pack's interests first. That's exactly why I feel so safe here, knowing you'll always do what's right, no matter how difficult the decision might be." Damien nodded slowly, though his eyes drifted toward the window, toward the darkness beyond where Elena had disappeared into the night nearly a week earlier. Something about the silence in the house felt wrong in a way he could not quite articulate, an absence that Seraphine's presence, despite her efforts, could not fill. Neither of them noticed the way Seraphine's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her fork as she watched the direction of his gaze, nor the brief flash of irritation that crossed her features before she smoothed her expression back into practiced sympathy. The game she had played so many times before, in packs whose names Damien would never learn, was far from over, and deep beneath the mountains, in a chamber filled with forgotten records, the woman she had cast aside was already beginning to unravel the threads of a deception that had taken years to weave. 3 days into their search through the archive room, Elena's fingers had gone raw from handling brittle paper, and her eyes ached from squinting at faded ink in the dim lantern light. Still, she refused to rest for longer than a few hours at a time, driven by a hunger for answers that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. Mara worked beside her without complaint, her decades of familiarity with the archive's chaotic organization proving invaluable as they sorted documents into rough piles by year and origin. "You should eat something," Mara said one afternoon, noticing the way Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for another bundle of papers. "Starving yourself won't bring the answers any faster." "I can't stop now," Elena replied, though she accepted the piece of bread Mara offered without further protest. Every day that passes, Seraphine tightens her hold on Damien and the pack. "I need to find something concrete before she does more damage." Charlotte had begun joining them in the evenings after her healing duties concluded, her sharp eyes proving useful for spotting patterns Elena and Mara sometimes missed after hours of exhausting work. It was Charlotte, in fact, who first noticed the unusual gap in the correspondence records. "Look at this," Charlotte said one evening, holding up a bundle of letters dated roughly 8 years earlier. "There's a whole section missing here, right in the middle of a series of trade agreements." Someone removed pages from this ledger. Elena leaned over to examine the binding Charlotte indicated, noting the uneven edges where several pages had clearly been torn away, leaving only jagged remnants close to the spine. Why would anyone bother removing pages from records this old? Nobody even knew these archives still existed until Mara brought us here. Unless someone wanted to make sure specific information never resurfaced, Mara said grimly, taking the ledger from Charlotte's hands to examine it more closely. "This dates from around the time I mentioned before, when the woman matching Seraphine's description joined the pack near the eastern border. If she left evidence of her activities in these records, and later learned this archive existed, she might have returned to erase the trail herself." The implications sent a chill through Elena that had nothing to do with the cool underground air. "You're suggesting Seraphine has been back here, specifically to destroy evidence?" "I'm suggesting it's possible," Mara clarified. "These mines have been abandoned for years, but not entirely forgotten by everyone who once used them. If she suspected records existed that could expose her pattern of behavior, a woman clever enough to manipulate multiple alphas would certainly be clever enough to eliminate any paper trail she could find." Elena took the damaged ledger, running her fingers gently over the torn edges, as though the missing pages might somehow reveal their contents through touch alone. Then whatever she was trying to hide must be significant. She wouldn't risk exposure by returning here, unless the information posed a real threat to whatever scheme she's currently running. There might be other records, Charlotte offered, gesturing toward the deeper recesses of the archive room where shadows swallowed the lantern light. The mining company kept duplicate copies of major transactions for their own accounting purposes. If she found and destroyed the primary records, she might not have known about the secondary archive. Mara's eyes lit with something close to excitement, an expression Elena had not seen from the older woman before. I had nearly forgotten about the duplicate storage. It's further back, past the old equipment room. The mining company used it primarily for tax purposes, records that wouldn't have seemed relevant enough for someone in a hurry to bother searching. The three women made their way deeper into the mine, past rusted carts and abandoned tools, left exactly as workers had left them when the operation ceased years earlier. The duplicate storage room, when they finally reached it, proved smaller than the main archive, but no less cluttered. Shelves packed tightly with ledgers that had clearly gone untouched for far longer than the ones they had already searched. It took another full day of careful searching before Elena found what she had been hoping for: a slim ledger tucked between two thicker volumes, its cover marked with a date that aligned precisely with the time frame Mara had described. Her hands trembled as she opened it, scanning page after page of shipment records, trade agreements, and correspondence between packs. And then, halfway through the ledger, she found a name that made her breath catch. Seraphine Vale, listed as a witness on a trade dispute resolution between two packs near the eastern border, dated 8 years earlier. The document detailed accusations remarkably similar to those that had destroyed Elena's standing within Silverwood: missing goods, forged evidence, a Luna cast out under circumstances that grew increasingly suspicious the more Elena read. "Mara," Elena called out, her voice unsteady with the weight of discovery. "I found her. This has to be the same woman you remembered." Mara hurried over, taking the ledger from Elena's hands and scanning the page with growing recognition dawning across her weathered features. "This is it," she confirmed. "This is the pack I served in, the incident I described to you. Seraphine Vale, listed here as a recent arrival who provided testimony against the pack's Luna during a dispute over missing trade goods." Charlotte peered over their shoulders, reading the faded text with obvious interest. "It says here the accused Luna maintained her innocence throughout the proceedings, but was ultimately cast out based on Seraphine's testimony and supporting documentation she provided to the pack elders." "The same pattern," Elena said quietly, the pieces finally beginning to form a coherent picture in her mind. She arrives, positions herself as a victim needing protection, then manufactures evidence against whoever stands between her and the position she wants. It's not coincidence. It's a method she's perfected over years, possibly across multiple packs we haven't even discovered yet. Mara continued flipping through the ledger, her expression growing darker with each page. "There's more here. A brief mention of Seraphine's departure from the pack, roughly 18 months after the incident, coinciding with reports of missing pack resources. The elders who documented this seem to have grown suspicious of her by that point, though apparently not soon enough to prevent significant damage. If she's done this multiple times," Charlotte said slowly, "there might be other victims out there, other Lunas who were cast out under false pretenses, just like Elena. Women who never learned the truth about why their lives were destroyed." The thought settled heavily over the small chamber, the weight of understanding the full scope of Seraphine's history pressing down on all three women. Elena thought of the Luna mentioned in these records, cast out years before her, likely still carrying the same confusion and heartbreak Elena herself had experienced only weeks earlier. How many others had suffered the same fate, their reputations destroyed, their bonds severed, all to serve whatever purpose drove Seraphine's calculated deceptions? "This is a start," Elena said finally, closing the ledger carefully and holding it against her chest, as though it were something precious. "But it's not enough yet. I need proof, connecting Seraphine directly to the fabricated evidence used against me at Silverwood. Historical records showing a pattern of behavior are compelling, but Damien will need something more concrete to reconsider what he believes happened." "What do you have in mind?" Mara asked. Elena's expression hardened with new resolve. "I need to find out exactly how she manufactured the evidence against me. The missing silver shipment, the forged ledger entries, Someone had to help her create those, or she found a method to do it herself. If I can trace how she accomplished that deception, I can prove definitively that the accusations against me were fabricated from the beginning. That might mean returning closer to Silverwood territory, Charlotte pointed out, which carries obvious risks, given how things ended when you left. I know, Elena acknowledged, though determination burned steadily in her voice, despite the danger such a return would entail. But I can't clear my name from inside this mountain. Eventually, I'll need to face Silverwood again, armed with enough proof that even Damien's clouded judgment cannot ignore the truth. Mara studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind her sharp eyes. You've changed since you arrived here, half broken and exhausted from your exile. There's a fire in you now that wasn't there before. I lost everything I thought defined me, Elena said quietly. My title, my home, the mate I trusted completely, but I refuse to lose the truth as well. Seraphine took everything else from me. I won't let her take that too. As the three women continued their work into the evening, poring over additional records that painted an increasingly clear picture of Seraphine's calculated history, none of them noticed the pack member who had followed Elena's trail from Silverwood, watching from a discreet distance, gathering information that would eventually make its way back to the woman who had orchestrated Elena's downfall in the first place. Seraphine's network of informants extended further than anyone at Silverwood suspected, a web of loyalty purchased through favors, secrets, and carefully cultivated fear. And somewhere within that network, word was already beginning to travel that the exiled Luna had not simply disappeared into obscurity as expected, but had instead found allies and resources that posed a genuine threat to everything Seraphine had worked so carefully to build. Back within the walls of Silverwood, the pack's daily rhythms had not returned to normal, despite Seraphine's efforts to settle comfortably into her new role. Tension simmered beneath the surface of every interaction, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever Seraphine entered a room, glances exchanged between pack members who remembered Elena's fairness, and wondered privately whether justice had truly been served. Nathan Reed, the elder who had performed the ceremony breaking Elena's seal, found himself increasingly troubled as the days passed. He had served Silverwood faithfully for over 2 decades, guiding 3 different alphas through difficult decisions, and something about the swift, almost frantic nature of Elena's exile continued to gnaw at his conscience. He had not questioned Damien's judgment in the moment, bound by tradition and respect for the alpha's authority, but doubt had taken root and refused to be dismissed. He found an opportunity to voice his concerns one evening, catching Damien alone in the study that had once belonged to generations of Silverwood alphas before him. The younger man sat hunched over reports of pack finances, his expression drawn with exhaustion that seemed to have settled permanently into his features since the night of Elena's exile. Alpha Cross, Nathan said carefully, closing the study door behind him. May I speak freely? Damien looked up, weariness evident in his eyes. Since when have you needed permission for that, old friend? Since I fear the answer you might give, Nathan admitted, taking a seat across from the desk without waiting for invitation. I have served this pack through good decisions and difficult ones alike, but the manner in which Elena's exile was carried out troubles me more with each passing day. Damien's jaw tightened, a familiar defensive posture that had become almost constant since the ceremony. The evidence was clear, Nathan. The missing shipment, the falsified ledger entries, all of it traced back to Elena's authority over pack resources. Traced back through evidence provided entirely by Seraphine, Nathan pointed out gently. Did anyone else independently verify these claims before the ceremony proceeded? Did we allow Elena adequate opportunity to examine the evidence against her, to present her own defense with proper time and consideration? The silence that followed stretched long enough that Nathan wondered if he had overstepped, but eventually, Damien's shoulders sagged slightly, some of the defensive rigidity draining from his posture. I acted quickly because the situation seemed urgent. Seraphine was distraught, insistent that further delay would only allow more resources to disappear. And in your haste to protect pack resources, Nathan said quietly, did you consider that urgency itself might have been manufactured to prevent careful examination of the claims being made? Damien's eyes flashed with something between anger and uncertainty. You believe I made a mistake? I believe, Nathan said carefully, choosing his words with the caution of a man who had navigated pack politics for decades, that grief and guilt can cloud even the wisest judgment. You felt responsible for Seraphine's suffering when she arrived seeking refuge. That guilt, combined with her evident distress over the missing shipment, may have prevented you from examining the situation with your usual clarity. Damien said nothing for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the window and the darkness beyond, toward wherever Elena had disappeared to in the weeks since her exile. She told me she would regret nothing, he said finally, so quietly Nathan almost missed the words. Elena, before she left. She said the truth always finds its way home eventually. Perhaps you should consider what that might mean, Nathan suggested. A woman with nothing left to lose rarely makes empty threats, Alpha Cross. If Elena believed so firmly in her own innocence, even facing complete exile from everything she had built here, that conviction deserves more consideration than it received. Before Damien could respond, the study door opened without warning, and Seraphine entered with a tray of tea, her expression arranging itself into practiced warmth the moment she noticed Nathan's presence. I thought you both might appreciate something warm, she said sweetly, though her eyes carried a sharpness that belied her gentle tone. Elder Reed, what brings you to the Alpha's study so late in the evening? Merely discussing pack matters, Nathan said carefully, watching the way Seraphine's attention immediately fixed on him with an intensity that felt distinctly predatory beneath its polished surface. Nothing that need concern you directly. Everything concerning Silverwood concerns me, Seraphine replied, setting the tray down with deliberate grace. I only wish to be helpful, given everything the Alpha has done for me since my arrival. Nathan rose from his seat, sensing the conversation had reached its natural end for the evening. I appreciate your hospitality, but I should return to my own duties. Alpha Cross, please consider what we discussed. As the elder departed, Seraphine's careful smile lingered only until the study door closed fully behind him. Then her expression shifted, subtly but unmistakably, into something colder as she turned back toward Damien. What exactly were you discussing with Elder Reed? Pack matters, Damien repeated, though something in his tone suggested he had noticed the shift in her demeanor. As he said. Of course, Seraphine said, though her fingers found their way to her collarbone in that familiar nervous gesture. It's only that I worry sometimes, that the older members of the pack might harbor lingering doubts about my presence here. After everything that's happened, I would hate for anyone to question your judgment. Damien studied her for a long moment, something calculating entering his gaze that had not been present in weeks. Why would anyone question my judgment, Seraphine? Unless there's something about the evidence you provided that couldn't withstand closer examination. The pause that followed was brief, barely noticeable to anyone not paying careful attention, but Damien had spent enough time observing pack members over the years to recognize hesitation when it appeared. Seraphine recovered quickly, moving to pour tea with steady hands, despite whatever calculation had briefly flickered behind her composed expression. Of course not, she said smoothly. I only meant that trust, once broken by uncertainty, can be difficult to fully restore. I would hate for anyone's doubts to poison the peace we've worked so hard to build here. Damien accepted the tea she offered, but his eyes remained fixed on her face with a new, uncomfortable scrutiny. Nathan mentioned something Elena said before she left, that the truth always finds its way home eventually. It stayed with me these past weeks, more than I expected. People say many things in moments of desperation, Seraphine replied, though her voice had grown slightly tighter. Surely you don't place weight on the parting words of someone caught in clear wrongdoing. I don't know what to place weight on anymore, Damien admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of the confession. Everything felt so certain that night, but the certainty has grown harder to hold on to as the days pass. Seraphine set down her own cup with deliberate care, moving around the desk to stand closer to him, her fingers trailing gently across his shoulder in a gesture calculated to offer comfort. You made the right decision, Damien. I know it feels difficult now, but Elena's betrayal was clear from the evidence. Don't let doubt undermine everything you accomplished by protecting this pack's resources and reputation. Despite her reassurances, something had shifted in Damien's expression, a crack forming in the certainty that had carried him through the ceremony weeks earlier. He said nothing further that evening, allowing Seraphine to guide the conversation towards safer topics, but the seed of doubt Nathan had planted continued to grow, quietly, persistently, refusing to be fully suppressed despite Seraphine's careful efforts. Later that night, alone in his chambers, Damien found himself staring at the small silver mark that had once adorned Elena's wrist, now sitting in a small box he had not been able to bring himself to discard, despite everything that had happened. He turned it over in his fingers, remembering the ceremony that had bound them together 3 years earlier, remembering the warmth in Elena's eyes that had never once wavered until the night he tore that same warmth away with his own hands. For the first time since the exile, he allowed himself to truly question whether the evidence against her had been as clear as he believed, or whether grief and manipulation had led him toward a decision he was only now beginning to fully comprehend the weight of. Meanwhile, deep within the mountains that housed the abandoned silver mines, Elena continued her methodical search through decades of forgotten records, unaware that her final words to Damien had already begun their slow work of unraveling the certainty that had condemned her. Truth, as she had promised, was indeed finding its way home, though the path it traveled proved far more complicated and dangerous than anyone involved could yet fully appreciate. A stranger arrived at the edge of Mara's settlement on a gray, overcast morning, moving with the careful gait of someone unfamiliar with the terrain, but determined not to show weakness. Elena spotted him first from the hillside where she had been gathering herbs for Charlotte's medical supplies, and something in his posture, alert and watchful despite his obvious exhaustion, made her set down her basket and approach with caution. "You're not from around here," she called out, keeping a reasonable distance between them. The man turned sharply, and Elena recognized him immediately. Felix Draven, an alpha from a smaller territory bordering Silverwood's eastern lands, someone she had met on occasion during pack gatherings and trade negotiations. His presence here, so far from his own territory, could not be coincidence. "Elena Ashford," Felix said, relief evident in his voice as recognition dawned. "I had hoped I would find you, though I wasn't certain the rumors were accurate." "What rumors?" Elena asked warily, unsure whether to trust anyone connected, however loosely, to the pack politics that had destroyed her life weeks earlier. Felix glanced around the settlement below them, taking in the modest homes and the wolves moving about their daily business. Word travels between border territories faster than most alphas realize. I heard whispers that Silverwood's former Luna had found refuge near the old silver mines, working alongside a woman named Mara to uncover something significant. Elena's guard remained firmly in place, despite the accuracy of his information. And why would an alpha from a neighboring territory concern himself with my situation? Because I have reason to believe the woman who replaced you poses a threat far beyond Silverwood's borders, Felix said grimly. May we speak somewhere more private? What I need to share isn't meant for casual ears. Cautious but curious, Elena led him down to the settlement, where Mara greeted the unexpected visitor with the same guarded assessment Elena herself had shown. Once seated within the relative privacy of Mara's home, Felix explained the circumstances that had brought him so far from his own territory. 3 years ago, before Seraphine ever appeared at Silverwood's borders, she spent several months within my own pack's territory, Felix began, his expression darkening with the memory. She arrived under similar circumstances, claiming to flee an abusive situation, seeking temporary refuge while she determined her next steps. What happened? Elena asked, though she suspected she already understood the shape of the story about to unfold. She grew close to my younger brother Marcus, who served as my second-in-command at the time, Felix continued. Within weeks, she had convinced him that our pack's trading partner across the mountain range was cheating us in resource negotiations. Marcus, trusting her completely, confronted our trading partner with accusations that ultimately destroyed a relationship our two territories had maintained peacefully for generations. Elena leaned forward, the pattern growing increasingly clear with each new revelation. Did she provide evidence for these accusations? Fabricated documents, much like I suspect she provided against you, Felix confirmed. By the time we discovered the deception, the damage was irreversible. Our trading partner, understandably furious at the false accusations, severed all ties with our territory. Resources we had relied upon for medicine and supplies became significantly harder to obtain. My brother, devastated by his role in the destruction, took his own responsibility for the situation harder than perhaps he should have. "Where is Seraphine during all of this?" Mara asked, though something in her tone suggested she already anticipated the answer. "Gone within a month of the incident," Felix said bitterly. "She left without explanation, taking with her a significant sum of resources my brother had foolishly entrusted to her care during their brief courtship. We never saw her again, until reports reached me recently that she had resurfaced at Silverwood, this time positioning herself against your standing as Luna." Elena absorbed this new information alongside everything Mara and Charlotte had already helped her uncover in the archives. "How did you learn I was here?" "I've maintained contact with several individuals within Silverwood's territory over the years, given our shared borders," Felix explained. "When word spread of your exile and the circumstances surrounding it, the pattern matched too closely to my own experience for me to ignore. I began asking careful questions, which eventually led me to Mara's settlement." "Why come here yourself, rather than simply sending word?" Elena pressed, still cautious despite the growing weight of evidence supporting her innocence. Felix's expression grew serious. "Because I believe Seraphine poses an ongoing threat that extends beyond any single pack's boundaries. If she has successfully repeated this pattern of manipulation across multiple territories, causing lasting damage each time, then stopping her requires more than simply clearing your name at Silverwood. It requires exposing the full scope of her deception before she can move on to her next target, wherever that might be." Mara nodded slowly, clearly reaching the same conclusion Felix had already formed. "We've uncovered similar patterns here in the archive records. Evidence suggesting Seraphine has orchestrated at least one other Luna's downfall years before targeting Elena. Your account confirms this isn't an isolated incident, but a calculated method she's perfected across multiple territories." "Then we need to combine what we've each discovered," Elena said, determination sharpening her voice. "Individually, our evidence might be dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. But together, a clear pattern emerges that no reasonable alpha could ignore, including Damien." Felix reached into a worn leather satchel he had carried throughout his journey, withdrawing several documents that he spread carefully across Mara's table. "I brought what evidence remained from our own incident, correspondence, financial records showing the resources Seraphine took when she disappeared, even a description matching her appearance provided by pack members who interacted with her during her time with us." Elena studied the documents carefully, cross-referencing details against the information she and Mara had already gathered from the mining archives. The picture forming was damning in its consistency. A woman who moved between packs with practiced skill, exploiting grief and guilt to position herself advantageously before extracting whatever resources or destruction served her purposes, then vanishing before consequences could catch up with her. "This is more than enough to raise serious questions," Elena said finally, "but I still need direct evidence connecting Seraphine to the specific fabrication used against me at Silverwood. Historical patterns are compelling, but Damien will need proof tied directly to my situation before he'll fully reconsider what happened." "What do you propose?" Felix asked. Elena's expression hardened with resolve that had been building steadily since her exile weeks earlier. "I need someone still within Silverwood who can help me access records showing exactly how the falsified shipment evidence was created. If Seraphine forged documents or manipulated existing records, there should be some trace of that manipulation, inconsistencies that wouldn't have been noticed during the rushed proceedings of my exile, but might become obvious under careful examination." "Grace," Mara suggested, recalling the name Elena had mentioned during their earlier conversations. "The pack member who helped you the night you left. If she remains loyal to you, she might be willing to help gather additional evidence from within Silverwood itself." "It's dangerous," Elena acknowledged, "especially if Seraphine has grown suspicious of anyone she perceives as sympathetic toward me. But it may be our best chance at finding the concrete proof necessary to force a genuine reconsideration of what happened." Felix nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression, as he observed the transformation in Elena since news of her exile had first reached his territory. "Whatever assistance my pack can provide, you have it. Seraphine has caused enough damage across too many territories. It's time her pattern of destruction finally came to an end." As the sun began to set over Mara's settlement, casting long shadows across the valley below. Elena felt something she had not experienced since the devastating night of her exile. Genuine hope that justice remained possible. That the truth she had promised would find its way home was finally beginning to take tangible shape. She did not yet know how dangerous the path forward would prove to be, nor how desperately Seraphine would fight to protect the elaborate deception she had spent years perfecting across territories that stretched far beyond anything Elena had originally imagined. Reaching Grace safely required careful planning, given the very real risk that Seraphine's informants might be watching for exactly this kind of contact. Mara suggested using a runner from her own settlement, a young man named Oliver, who had grown up along the border territories and knew how to move unseen through contested land. Elena wrote a brief, carefully worded message, giving nothing away should it fall into the wrong hands, and asked only that Grace meet her at a designated location 2 days' journey from Silverwood, chosen specifically for its distance from any pack's regular patrol routes. The waiting proved agonizing. Elena spent the following days continuing her work in the archives alongside Mara, but her concentration wavered constantly, thoughts drifting toward whether Grace would receive the message safely, whether she would still be willing to help given the risks involved, whether Seraphine's suspicion had already grown sharp enough to notice anything unusual in Grace's behavior. On the appointed day, Elena traveled to the meeting point with Felix accompanying her for protection, both of them alert to any sign that they had been followed or that the meeting had been compromised. The location Mara had chosen sat within a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest, offering multiple avenues of retreat should trouble arise. Grace arrived precisely on schedule, and the moment Elena saw her old friend's face, relief flooded through her at the evident sincerity in Grace's expression, no hesitation. No sign of the betrayal Elena had feared might have developed under Seraphine's watchful influence. "I wasn't certain you would come," Elena admitted, as they embraced briefly, before stepping back to assess the situation more carefully. "I would have found a way regardless of the risk," Grace said firmly. "Things have grown worse since you left, Elena. Seraphine's influence over Damien continues to expand, and several pack members who once questioned her presence have grown too frightened to voice their concerns openly." "Frightened of what?" Elena asked. Grace glanced around nervously despite the apparent isolation of their meeting place. "She has ways of making life difficult for anyone who displeases her. Nothing overt enough to draw the Alpha's attention, but subtle pressures, denied resources, unfavorable assignments, whispered rumors that damage reputations quietly. Nathan Reed tried speaking with Damien directly about his concerns, but even that conversation seems to have accomplished little beyond planting seeds of doubt that Seraphine works constantly to suppress." Elena explained quickly what she and her allies had discovered, the pattern of manipulation extending across multiple territories, the evidence pointing toward Seraphine's history of orchestrating similar downfalls elsewhere. Grace listened with growing horror, pieces of confusing behavior she had witnessed within Silverwood, suddenly clicking into disturbing clarity. "I need your help accessing the original shipment records," Elena explained once she had finished outlining everything they had uncovered. "If Seraphine forged or manipulated documents to frame me, there should be inconsistencies somewhere, differences in handwriting, altered dates, something that wouldn't have been noticed during the rushed proceedings that led to my exile." Grace nodded slowly, though worry remained evident in her expression. "The records are kept in the pack's administrative offices, which Seraphine has been granted increasing access to since your departure. It won't be easy to examine them without drawing attention, but I can try. Nathan Reed might also be willing to help, given his own growing doubts about what happened." "Be careful," Felix interjected, speaking for the first time since the reunion began. "If Seraphine has invested this much effort into destroying reputations and manipulating pack politics across multiple territories, she won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose her methods." Grace's expression hardened with determination, despite the evident fear underlying her resolve. "Elena was the best Luna Silverwood has known in generations. I won't stand by and watch her name remain tarnished by lies, regardless of the personal risk involved." They spent another hour finalizing plans for how Grace would attempt to access and examine the shipment records, establishing a system for secure communication that would minimize the risk of discovery. Elena provided Grace with specific details about what inconsistencies to search for, drawing on everything she had learned during her weeks studying the archived records of Seraphine's previous deceptions. As Grace prepared to depart, ensuring she would return to Silverwood before her absence became noticeable, she paused and turned back toward Elena with an expression that mixed hope and lingering concern. "What will you do once we have proof?" "Damien tore your seal in front of the entire pack. Even with evidence of Seraphine's deception, will he be willing to acknowledge such a public mistake?" Elena considered the question carefully, aware that the answer mattered less to her sense of justice than it might have weeks earlier. "I don't know what Damien will choose to do with the truth once he has it, but I know I cannot allow Seraphine to continue destroying lives and reputations simply because confronting her might prove uncomfortable or embarrassing for those she's manipulated. Whatever happens between Damien and myself, exposing her pattern of deception matters beyond just my own vindication." Grace nodded, understanding evident in her eyes. "I'll send word as soon as I've found something concrete. Stay safe, Elena, and know that regardless of what Damien decides, there are those of us within Silverwood who never stopped believing in your innocence." The journey back to Mara's settlement passed in contemplative silence, Elena processing everything discussed during the meeting, while Felix remained watchful for any sign of pursuit. They arrived safely as evening settled over the mountains, and Elena found herself immediately drawn into a detailed conversation with Mara and Charlotte about the plans now set into motion. Days passed with agonizing slowness as they awaited word from Grace, each morning bringing renewed hope, followed by disappointment when no message arrived. Elena filled the waiting hours continuing her work in the archives, uncovering additional fragments of Seraphine's history scattered across the mining records, small pieces that added further weight to the growing case against her. It was during one of these searches, nearly 2 weeks after the meeting with Grace, that Charlotte burst into the archive chamber with an expression of barely contained excitement, a sealed letter clutched in her trembling hands. "This just arrived," she announced breathlessly. "Oliver intercepted it from a contact near Silverwood's border. It's from Grace." Elena's hands shook as she broke the seal, unfolding the letter with desperate anticipation. The words within confirmed everything they had suspected, describing in careful detail the inconsistencies Grace had discovered within the shipment records, dates that didn't align with actual delivery schedules, handwriting on key documents that subtly differed from Elena's genuine signature, despite careful attempts at forgery, and most damning of all, a small tool discovered hidden within Seraphine's private chambers, an instrument used specifically for applying silver treatments to documents in ways that could artificially age or alter their appearance. She found physical evidence, Elena breathed, hardly daring to believe the significance of what Grace had uncovered. Not just circumstantial inconsistencies, but an actual tool used in the forgery process itself. Mara leaned over to examine the letter more closely, her expression grim with satisfaction, despite the seriousness of the revelation. "This changes everything. Circumstantial patterns across territories are compelling, but physical evidence directly connecting Seraphine to the specific forgery used against you removes any reasonable doubt about what actually happened." "There's more," Elena continued, her voice growing tighter as she read further into Grace's careful account. "Nathan Reed has agreed to examine the evidence himself, using his authority as pack elder to formally investigate before bringing findings to Damien directly. He believes, given his own growing doubts, that presenting this evidence through proper pack channels will carry more weight than if I simply returned to confront Seraphine myself." Felix, who had remained largely quiet during the reading, spoke up with obvious relief evident in his tone. "This is exactly what we needed. Physical evidence, examined and verified by a respected pack elder, presented through legitimate channels rather than accusations that could be dismissed as personal grievance. Seraphine will find it far more difficult to manipulate her way out of this kind of proof." Elena folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as she allowed herself, for the first time since her exile, to genuinely believe that justice might finally be within reach. The path forward remained uncertain, and she knew Seraphine would not surrender her carefully constructed position without a fight. But the evidence now gathering against her had grown too substantial to easily dismiss or explain away. "We need to prepare for what comes next," Elena said, determination hardening her voice, despite the emotional weight of everything Grace's discovery represented. If Nathan intends to bring formal evidence before Damien, Seraphine will undoubtedly sense the shifting tide and attempt some form of countermeasure. We cannot allow her the opportunity to destroy this evidence or manufacture some new deception before the truth can be properly presented. Mara nodded slowly, already turning her thoughts toward practical considerations. We should return to Silverwood's vicinity ourselves, close enough to respond quickly should circumstances require our direct involvement, but cautious enough to avoid alerting Seraphine to our presence before Nathan has the opportunity to present his findings. As the small group began finalizing plans for their approach toward Silverwood territory, none of them could have anticipated just how desperately Seraphine would fight once she sensed the ground shifting beneath the elaborate deception she had spent years perfecting, nor the lengths she would go to protect a secret far more dangerous than anyone had yet uncovered. Within Silverwood, Nathan Reed moved carefully in the days following Grace's discovery, aware that any misstep could alert Seraphine to the investigation building quietly against her. He examined the forgery tool Grace had found, along with the inconsistencies in the shipment records, with the meticulous attention that had earned him respect throughout his decades of service to the pack. Each piece of evidence, viewed individually, might have raised only minor questions. Together, they formed an unmistakable picture of deliberate deception. He requested a private meeting with Damien, choosing a time when Seraphine had left the Alpha's house to attend to matters elsewhere within the territory. Damien received him with the same weariness that had marked their previous conversation weeks earlier, though something in his expression suggested he had continued wrestling with the doubts Nathan had first planted. "I have something you need to see," Nathan said without preamble, spreading the evidence across Damien's desk with careful precision. Evidence that raises serious questions about the circumstances surrounding Elena's exile. Damien's expression shifted from tired curiosity to something sharper as he examined the documents and the small silver treatment tool Nathan had brought with him. "Where did this come from?" "Grace discovered it," Nathan explained, choosing his words carefully to protect Elena's location and the full scope of the investigation without compromising the integrity of what he needed to convey. She noticed inconsistencies in the shipment records that troubled her, dates that didn't align with actual delivery patterns, subtle differences in handwriting on documents attributed to Elena's authority. This tool was discovered separately, used specifically for artificially aging or altering paper in ways consistent with the alterations found in those records. "You're suggesting the evidence used against Elena was fabricated," Damien said slowly, though his tone carried more acceptance than surprise, as though some part of him had already suspected this possibility. "I'm presenting evidence that strongly suggests exactly that," Nathan confirmed. Combined with information suggesting Seraphine has a documented history of similar manipulation within other pack territories, the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Damien's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the forgery tool, turning it over as though the small object might somehow explain the devastating consequences its use had produced. "Where was this found?" Nathan hesitated only briefly before answering, aware that the truth might prove difficult for Damien to accept. "Within Seraphine's private chambers, discovered during a careful examination prompted by the inconsistencies Grace identified in the official records." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, Damien's expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked remarkably like grief, as the full weight of what this evidence suggested began settling over him. "I tore the seal from her wrist myself," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "In front of the entire pack, I called her a thief and a liar, based on evidence that may have been entirely fabricated. We cannot be entirely certain until further investigation confirms these findings," Nathan cautioned, though his own tone carried little genuine doubt. "But the evidence gathered thus far is substantial enough that dismissing these concerns without proper investigation would itself constitute a significant failure of leadership." Damien rose from his desk, pacing the length of his study with barely controlled agitation. "Where is Seraphine now?" "Attending to matters in the eastern section of our territory, as I understand," Nathan replied. "I chose this time specifically to speak with you privately, without risk of her presence complicating this conversation." "Good," Damien said, though something dangerous had entered his voice, a controlled fury that Nathan had witnessed only rarely, during his years serving under this particular Alpha. I need time to process what this evidence suggests before confronting her directly. If she senses suspicion too early, she may attempt to flee or destroy additional evidence before we can properly address what may have actually happened. Nathan nodded in agreement, relieved that Damien's response, while clearly emotional, remained grounded in the kind of careful reasoning that had made him an effective leader despite the significant lapse in judgment that had led to Elena's exile. "What would you like to do?" "I need to speak with Elena," Damien said, the words carrying a weight of admission that seemed to cost him considerable effort. "If this evidence proves accurate, I owe her far more than a simple correction of the official record. I need to understand exactly what happened, and I need to hear directly from her what these past weeks have cost her because of my failure to examine the truth more carefully before acting. She remains at Mara's settlement near the old silver mines, from what I understand," Nathan offered, aware that Elena had likely intended this information to eventually reach Damien once sufficient evidence had been gathered. Grace maintained contact with her throughout this investigation, coordinating the search for evidence that could clarify what actually transpired. Damien's expression tightened with new resolve, though guilt and uncertainty still lingered visibly beneath the surface. "I need to see this evidence firsthand, examine the records myself before confronting Seraphine with these accusations. Can you arrange transportation to Mara's settlement without alerting anyone to our purpose?" "I can," Nathan confirmed, "though I would caution careful timing. Seraphine's absence today provides opportunity, but her return will require some explanation for both our absences should we depart together." "Then I'll travel alone," Damien decided. "You remain here, continue monitoring the situation, and prevent Seraphine from suspecting anything has changed until I return with clearer understanding of what actually happened these past months." Within the hour, Damien departed Silverwood under the cover of an ordinary hunting expedition, a pretense that would explain his temporary absence without raising immediate suspicion. The journey toward Mara's settlement passed in tense contemplation, memories of the exile ceremony replaying constantly in his mind, alongside growing dread about what confirmation of Seraphine's deception might mean, not just for Elena's reputation, but for everything he had believed about his own judgment as Alpha. He arrived at the outskirts of Mara's settlement as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley, uncertain exactly how he would be received after the devastating manner in which he had ended his bond with Elena weeks earlier. Felix spotted him first, recognizing the Silverwood Alpha immediately, despite his attempt to travel without obvious pack markings, and quickly alerted Elena to the unexpected arrival. Elena's heart pounded painfully as she watched Damien approach, uncertain whether his presence signaled genuine reconsideration or some new complication in the already precarious situation they had worked so carefully to navigate. She met him at the edge of the settlement, keeping careful distance between them, despite the memories that surfaced painfully at his familiar presence. "Damien," she said, her voice carefully neutral, despite the storm of emotions his sudden appearance stirred within her. "I wasn't expecting you." "Nathan showed me evidence," Damien said without preamble, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made Elena's breath catch, despite her determination to remain guarded. "The forgery tool, the inconsistencies in the shipment records. I need to understand what actually happened, Elena. I need to hear it directly from you." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity evident in his expression against the memory of how quickly he had believed accusations against her weeks earlier, without demanding similar proof or explanation. "Why should I trust that this visit represents genuine reconsideration, rather than another manipulation, orchestrated by someone determined to maintain control over pack politics?" The question clearly struck Damien hard, guilt flashing across his features before he composed himself enough to respond. "You have every reason to doubt my sincerity, given how quickly I condemned you without proper investigation weeks ago. I can only tell you that the evidence Nathan presented has forced me to confront the possibility that I made a devastating mistake, one that requires far more than simple correction if it proves accurate." Mara, who had been observing the exchange from a respectful distance, stepped forward with the archived documents she and Elena had spent weeks compiling. "Perhaps this evidence will prove more persuasive than words alone, Alpha Cross. We have documented a pattern of behavior extending across multiple pack territories, Evidence suggesting Seraphine has orchestrated similar deceptions before, evidence that predates her arrival at Silverwood by several years. Damien accepted the documents with visibly trembling hands, beginning to read through the carefully organized evidence that Elena, Mara, Charlotte, and Felix had spent weeks gathering. As he progressed through record after record, detailing Seraphine's history of calculated manipulation, his expression shifted from disbelief to horror, to something that looked remarkably like shame. "This is far more extensive than I imagined," he said finally, looking up from the documents with an expression that had aged considerably since he first arrived at the settlement. "She's done this before, multiple times, across different territories. I was simply her latest target." "Not simply her target," Elena corrected quietly. "Her latest victim in a pattern of destruction she has perfected over years. And unless we act carefully to expose the full scope of what she has done, she will continue this pattern indefinitely, moving from pack to pack, leaving devastation in her wake, while she escapes any real consequence." Damien's jaw tightened with resolve that Elena recognized from earlier days, before Seraphine's arrival had complicated everything between them. "Then we need to ensure she finally faces consequence for everything she has done, not just to you, but to every pack and every person she has manipulated across all these years." As evening settled over Mara's settlement, Elena found herself, for the first time since her devastating exile, sitting across from Damien, in careful, honest conversation, working together with her allies to formulate a plan that would finally expose Seraphine's deception before the entire pack that had once cast Elena aside, based on her calculated lies. The planning stretched late into the night, candlelight flickering across the table, as Elena, Damien, Mara, Charlotte, and Felix examined every angle of how to approach the coming confrontation. Elena remained cautious throughout the discussion, unwilling to let old affection cloud her judgment, simply because Damien had finally begun questioning the decisions that had led to her exile. "She'll sense something has changed the moment I return," Damien said, running a hand through his hair with obvious exhaustion. "Seraphine has proven remarkably perceptive throughout her time at Silverwood. If I return acting differently, she may grow suspicious before we have the opportunity to present this evidence formally before the pack." "Then don't act differently," Elena suggested. "Return as though nothing has changed. Continue the pretense that convinced her she had succeeded completely. Meanwhile, we prepare to present the evidence during the next formal pack gathering, when the largest number of witnesses will be present to hear the truth simultaneously." Felix nodded in agreement, his experience with pack politics from his own territory proving valuable in shaping their approach. A public revelation, presented with undeniable evidence before the full pack, will prevent Seraphine from manipulating the narrative afterward through private conversations or selective persuasion. She thrives in situations where she can control information individually. Removing that control by presenting everything simultaneously to the entire pack eliminates her usual methods of damage control. "When is the next formal gathering scheduled?" Elena asked. 5 days from now," Damien confirmed. "The autumn assembly, when the entire pack gathers to discuss resource allocation for the coming winter months. Seraphine will certainly attend, likely positioned prominently given her established role within pack leadership." "Then that becomes our target," Mara said decisively. 5 days to finalize our evidence, ensure everything is properly documented and verified, and prepare for whatever reaction Seraphine might have once her deception stands exposed before witnesses she cannot easily manipulate or silence. The conversation continued deep into the night, covering every possible contingency, every way Seraphine might attempt to defend herself, or turn the situation to her advantage, even when confronted with substantial evidence. Elena found herself grateful for Felix's experience with pack politics and Mara's careful, methodical approach to strategy, both proving invaluable as they refined their plan towards something that felt genuinely capable of succeeding. Before departing to return to Silverwood the following morning, Damien sought a private moment with Elena, away from the others who had gathered to help plan the coming confrontation. They walked together toward the edge of the settlement, silence stretching between them, heavy with everything left unsaid since the devastating night of her exile. "I don't know how to properly apologize for what I did," Damien said finally, his voice rough with emotion he had clearly been suppressing throughout the previous evening's careful strategic discussions. Words feel entirely insufficient given everything you've suffered because of my failure to examine the truth more carefully. Elena studied him for a long moment, old hurt warring with the cautious hope that had been building since Nathan's evidence first reached her through Grace's careful investigation. You humiliated me before the entire pack, Damien. You tore away everything I had built alongside you over 3 years, based on evidence you never bothered to properly verify. Apologies, however sincere, cannot simply erase that experience. I know, Damien acknowledged, guilt evident in every line of his expression. I'm not asking you to forget or to simply forgive what happened, because I've finally recognized my mistake. I only want you to understand that I intend to make this right, regardless of what that means, for whatever remains between us personally. Elena considered his words carefully, recognizing sincerity in his tone even as caution continued warning her against too quickly trusting someone who had so readily believed accusations against her weeks earlier. The most important thing right now is exposing Seraphine's pattern of deception, preventing her from continuing to destroy other lives and other packs the way she nearly destroyed mine. Whatever happens between us personally can be addressed once that larger goal has been accomplished. Damien nodded slowly, accepting her careful boundary without argument. Fair enough. I'll return to Silverwood, maintain the pretense we've discussed, and prepare everything necessary for the assembly in 5 days. Nathan will help coordinate from within the pack, ensuring the evidence remains secure and properly documented until we're ready to present it publicly. As Damien prepared to depart, he paused one final time, turning back toward Elena with an expression that carried genuine regret beyond simply the political consequences of his earlier decision. For whatever it's worth, watching you these past hours, working alongside allies you've gathered through your own strength and determination despite everything I put you through, I've never respected you more than I do right now. Elena said nothing in response, though something in his words settled uncomfortably close to feelings she had been carefully suppressing since her exile. She watched him depart toward Silverwood, uncertain what the coming days would bring, both for the confrontation with Seraphine and for whatever remained possible between herself and the mate who had so devastatingly betrayed her trust weeks earlier. The following days passed in intense preparation, Elena and her allies finalizing every detail of the evidence they intended to present, ensuring nothing could be dismissed or explained away once revealed before the assembled pack. Grace continued providing updates from within Silverwood, confirming that Seraphine remained unaware of the investigation building against her, still confident in her position of influence over pack leadership. Nathan Reed worked carefully to ensure proper documentation of everything they had discovered, understanding that presenting evidence through official pack channels would carry significantly more weight than accusations that could be dismissed as personal grievance between Elena and the woman who had replaced her. He compiled the archive records from Mara's mining collection, Felix's testimony regarding Seraphine's history within his own territory, and the physical evidence Grace had discovered within Seraphine's private chambers, into a comprehensive presentation designed to leave no reasonable doubt about the pattern of deception they had uncovered. 3 days before the scheduled assembly, disaster nearly struck when Seraphine, growing increasingly restless despite her continued confidence, decided to conduct her own inspection of the pack's administrative records, ostensibly to ensure everything remained properly organized, following the disruption of Elena's exile. Grace, working within the administrative offices at the time, barely managed to conceal the evidence she had been documenting before Seraphine's unexpected arrival. "She's growing suspicious," Grace warned, in a hastily sent message to Elena, delivered through Oliver's careful courier network. "I don't know if she suspects anything specific, or if this is simply her natural caution reasserting itself, but we may need to accelerate our timeline before she uncovers what we're preparing to reveal." Elena read the warning with growing concern, aware that their carefully constructed plan could unravel entirely if Seraphine discovered the evidence before they had the opportunity to present it properly before the assembled pack. She consulted quickly with Mara and Felix, weighing whether to proceed with their original timeline or attempt some accelerated confrontation that might sacrifice the careful preparation they had invested in ensuring undeniable proof. "We cannot rush this," Mara advised firmly. "If we present incomplete evidence, or reveal our findings before Nathan has properly secured everything necessary for a formal presentation, Seraphine may find opportunity to manipulate the situation even now. We need to trust the plan we've carefully constructed, while remaining alert to any sign that circumstances require immediate adaptation. Felix agreed, though concern remained evident in his expression. Grace's warning suggests we should communicate additional caution to Nathan, ensuring the evidence remains secure until the assembly itself. Perhaps suggesting he complete the final documentation somewhere less accessible than the administrative offices where Seraphine might stumble upon it unexpectedly. Elena sent word back through the same careful courier network, advising increased caution while confirming their commitment to the original timeline. The following 2 days passed with agonizing tension, every report from within Silverwood carrying the weight of potential discovery, every silence between messages stretching Elena's nerves toward breaking point. Finally, the morning of the scheduled assembly arrived, Elena rising before dawn to prepare for what would prove to be the most crucial confrontation of her exile, the moment when months of careful investigation and painful sacrifice would either successfully expose Seraphine's calculated deception or potentially collapse under whatever countermeasures the manipulative woman might have prepared in response to her growing suspicion. Mara, Charlotte, and Felix prepared to accompany Elena on the journey back toward Silverwood, understanding the significance of what awaited them at the assembly, while Grace and Nathan worked within the pack itself to ensure everything remained properly arranged for the presentation that would finally bring years of Seraphine's manipulation into the light. As they set out toward Silverwood in the pale morning light, Elena felt a complicated mixture of determination and apprehension settling over her, aware that regardless of how the coming confrontation unfolded, nothing about her life would remain the same once the truth finally stood revealed before the pack that had once so readily condemned her based on calculated lies. The assembly hall stood filled to capacity by the time Elena and her allies arrived, having entered Silverwood territory through a discreet path Nathan had arranged to avoid drawing premature attention. Elena remained hidden with Mara, Charlotte, and Felix in a small antechamber adjoining the main hall, waiting for the signal that would indicate the appropriate moment to enter and present their evidence before the assembled pack. Through a gap in the doorway, Elena could see Seraphine seated prominently near the front of the hall, positioned close to where Damien would preside over the assembly, her expression carrying the same confident composure that had characterized her presence throughout her time at Silverwood. She had no indication yet of what awaited her, no sense that the careful deception she had constructed over months was about to unravel completely before witnesses she could not simply charm or manipulate away. Damien called the assembly to order, his voice carrying the practiced authority Elena remembered from countless similar gatherings throughout her years as Luna. He addressed routine matters first, resource allocation for the coming winter, updates on territorial boundaries, standard business that gave no indication of the significant revelation about to unfold. Then, as the routine business concluded, Nathan Reed rose from his position among the pack elders, requesting formal recognition to address a matter of significant importance to the entire assembly. Damien granted his request, and Elena watched through the doorway as Seraphine's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, some instinct, perhaps sensing that this presentation carried weight beyond ordinary pack business. "Several weeks ago," Nathan began, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed assembly hall, "this pack witnessed the exile of our Luna, Elena Ashford, based on evidence presented regarding missing pack resources. I stand before you today because subsequent investigation has revealed serious questions about the validity of that evidence, questions that demand this assembly's attention before we can consider the matter properly resolved." Murmurs spread through the assembled pack, confusion and curiosity evident on many faces as they processed this unexpected turn. Seraphine's composure remained outwardly steady, though Elena, watching carefully from her hidden vantage point, noticed the subtle tension entering her posture, fingers finding their way to her collarbone in that familiar nervous gesture. "What questions?" Someone called from within the assembled crowd, giving voice to the confusion evident throughout the hall. Nathan gestured toward the antechamber where Elena and her allies waited, and this was the signal they had arranged, the moment for Elena to step forward and reclaim her voice before the pack that had once so readily condemned her. She emerged from the shadows with Mara, Charlotte, and Felix following close behind, carrying the carefully compiled evidence that represented weeks of painful, meticulous investigation. Gasps rippled through the assembly as recognition spread, pack members who had witnessed her devastating exile now watching in stunned silence as their former Luna walked purposefully toward the front of the hall. Elena kept her gaze forward, refusing to be intimidated by the weight of hundreds of eyes suddenly fixed upon her, drawing strength from the presence of allies who had helped her uncover the truth despite every obstacle placed before them. Seraphine's composure finally cracked as Elena approached, something calculating and dangerous flashing behind eyes that had perfected the appearance of gentle vulnerability for far too long. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, rising from her seat with an expression that struggled between outrage and barely concealed alarm. "The meaning," Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of finally confronting the woman who had orchestrated her downfall, "is that the truth you worked so carefully to bury has finally found its way home, exactly as I promised it would." Nathan stepped forward, presenting the assembled evidence methodically before the entire pack, beginning with the forgery tool Grace had discovered within Seraphine's private chambers, moving through the documented inconsistencies in the shipment records that had originally condemned Elena, and finally presenting the historical pattern uncovered through Mara's archive research and Felix's testimony regarding Seraphine's activities within his own territory years earlier. The assembly hall grew increasingly tense as Nathan's presentation continued, pack members exchanging shocked glances as the full scope of Seraphine's calculated deception became clear. Felix rose to provide his own testimony directly, describing the devastating consequences his own pack had suffered years earlier due to manipulations strikingly similar to what had occurred at Silverwood. "This is absurd," Seraphine interrupted, her voice rising with practiced indignation, though something increasingly desperate had entered her tone as the weight of evidence continued accumulating against her. "You expect this assembly to believe fabricated accusations from a woman desperate to reclaim what she lost through her own wrongdoing?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Damien said, finally breaking his own silence throughout the presentation, his expression carrying the weight of someone forced to confront a devastating truth about his own judgment. "I examined this evidence myself, Seraphine. The forgery tool discovered in your chambers, the historical pattern extending across multiple territories, the testimony from Felix regarding events his own pack suffered years before your arrival here. These are not fabrications born of desperation. They are documented facts that demand answers only you can provide." Seraphine's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions, calculation warring with growing desperation, as she recognized the situation slipping beyond her ability to control through her usual methods of manipulation. "Everything I did to protect this pack," she insisted, though her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Elena's mismanagement of resources threatened Silverwood's stability. I only sought to address that threat before it caused irreparable damage." "Except there was no mismanagement," Nathan countered firmly. "The shipment records you presented as evidence were themselves fabricated, using tools and methods documented in the evidence we've presented today. Elena committed no wrongdoing whatsoever. The only deception that occurred was your own, carefully constructed to destroy her standing and elevate your own position within this pack." The assembly hall had grown deathly quiet, hundreds of pack members watching the confrontation unfold, with expressions ranging from horror to dawning understanding of how thoroughly they had been deceived alongside their alpha. Elena watched Seraphine carefully, recognizing the moment when genuine panic finally broke through the composed mask she had maintained for so long. "You don't understand," Seraphine said, her voice growing increasingly frantic as she recognized the evidence arrayed against her had grown too substantial to simply deny or explain away. This pack needed strong leadership Elena couldn't provide given her weakness and indecision. "I only did what was necessary." "Weakness?" Elena repeated, stepping forward with quiet dignity, despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "I led this pack for 3 years with fairness and dedication, earning the trust of every member through honest leadership, rather than manufactured lies and calculated tears. You mistake compassion for weakness because you've never experienced genuine care for anyone beyond your own ambitions." Seraphine's expression twisted with something ugly, the careful mask she had maintained throughout her time at Silverwood, finally crumbling entirely before the assembled witnesses. "This pack was never yours to lead properly," she spat, months of calculated pretense giving way to raw ambition finally exposed before everyone present. "I've watched countless packs, countless so-called leaders too soft and too trusting to protect what they claim to value. I simply took what weak leadership left vulnerable." The confession, however unintentional, confirmed everything Elena and her allies had worked so desperately to prove. Seraphine's own words revealing the calculated ambition that had driven her pattern of deception across multiple territories. Gasps and murmurs of outrage spread through the assembled pack, as the full truth of her manipulation finally stood exposed before them all. Damien's expression had grown increasingly cold throughout Seraphine's unraveling confession, years of careful pretense finally stripped away, to reveal the calculating manipulator who had so successfully exploited his guilt and grief weeks earlier. "You will leave Silverwood territory immediately," he declared, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha authority. "Any resources you attempted to claim through your deception will be returned, and should evidence emerge that you attempt this same pattern of manipulation against any other pack, know that Silverwood will ensure the full truth of your history follows you wherever you attempt to rebuild your schemes." Seraphine's eyes darted around the assembly hall, searching desperately for any remaining sympathy or support among the pack members who had once welcomed her with open trust. She found only cold judgment and dawning understanding of how completely she had manipulated them all. Without further protest, recognizing the impossibility of salvaging her position, she gathered what dignity remained and departed the hall under the watchful escort of pack guards assigned to ensure her prompt removal from Silverwood territory. As the assembly hall doors closed behind her, finality settling over the dramatic confrontation that had just unfolded, Elena felt the weight of months of pain, uncertainty, and desperate investigation finally beginning to lift. She had done what she promised on the night of her devastating exile, brought the truth home, despite every obstacle placed before her, and watched justice finally prevail over calculated deception. But as she turned to face the assembled pack, hundreds of eyes now filled with a mixture of shame and renewed respect, Elena understood that exposing Seraphine's lies represented only the beginning of what needed to happen next. The difficult work of rebuilding trust, both within the pack she had once led, and within herself, toward a future that remained uncertain despite the vindication she had finally achieved. The days following Seraphine's exposure and removal from Silverwood brought a flurry of activity throughout the pack, as members grappled with understanding how thoroughly they had been deceived, and pack leadership worked to address the damage done during Seraphine's brief but destructive influence. Nathan Reed took charge of formally documenting everything that had been uncovered, ensuring a complete record existed should Seraphine's pattern of manipulation ever resurface within another territory. Grace found herself celebrated among pack members for the courage she had shown investigating the shipment records despite significant personal risk, though she deflected much of the praise toward Elena's own determination and the crucial assistance provided by Mara, Charlotte, and Felix throughout the difficult weeks of investigation. Felix remained at Silverwood for several days following the assembly, working with Damien and Nathan to establish formal communication between their territories, ensuring that knowledge of Seraphine's methods would be shared appropriately to help prevent similar deceptions from succeeding elsewhere. Before departing to return to his own pack, he sought out Elena for a private conversation. "Your courage throughout this entire ordeal deserves recognition beyond what today's confrontation provided," Felix told her, genuine respect evident in his expression. Many wolves, faced with such devastating betrayal, would have simply disappeared into obscurity, allowing their reputation to remain forever tarnished by lies, rather than fighting to reclaim the truth. "I couldn't allow her to continue destroying lives and reputations without consequence," Elena replied. "Not after understanding the full scope of what she had done, not just to me, but to your own pack, and likely others we haven't even discovered yet. Whatever you decide regarding your future here at Silverwood," Felix said, "know that my own territory would welcome your leadership should you ever seek a fresh beginning elsewhere. The wisdom and determination you've demonstrated throughout this investigation would serve any pack fortunate enough to have you." Elena thanked him sincerely for the offer, though she remained uncertain what her future held, whether at Silverwood or elsewhere, as she processed everything that had happened since the devastating night of her exile. The question of her relationship with Damien remained similarly uncertain, complicated by genuine hurt that could not simply be erased by his eventual recognition of Seraphine's deception. Damien, for his part, made no attempt to rush Elena toward reconciliation, understanding on some level that trust, once so thoroughly broken, required patient rebuilding rather than simple assumption that circumstances could return to how they had been before Seraphine's arrival disrupted everything. He formally acknowledged before the entire pack that his hasty judgment had caused Elena significant unwarranted suffering, publicly apologizing for failing to properly investigate the accusations against her before acting so decisively to end their bond. The pack itself worked to make amends in whatever ways possible, many members seeking out Elena individually to express regret for their silence during her exile, for failing to speak in her defense despite harboring private doubts about the swift proceedings that had condemned her. Elena accepted these apologies with grace, understanding that fear of the Alpha's authority had silenced many who might otherwise have supported her, without excusing entirely the collective failure that had allowed Seraphine's manipulation to succeed so thoroughly. 2 weeks after the dramatic assembly that exposed Seraphine's deception, Damien approached Elena privately, requesting a conversation he had clearly been considering carefully in the time since her return to Silverwood territory. They met in the same garden where he had once proposed the mating bond that had defined 3 years of Elena's life before Seraphine's arrival threatened to destroy everything they had built together. "I don't expect you to simply forgive what happened," Damien began, his voice carrying genuine humility that had been notably absent during the weeks of Seraphine's manipulation. "The pain I caused you, the public humiliation, the exile from everything you had worked to build here, these cannot be undone simply because the truth has finally been revealed." "No," Elena agreed quietly, "they cannot be undone. But I appreciate that you understand this, rather than expecting immediate restoration of everything that existed before. What I hope," Damien continued, "is that given time, given consistent demonstration that I've learned from this devastating mistake, we might eventually rebuild something resembling the trust we once shared. Not because I expect it, or believe I deserve it after everything that happened, but because I recognize now, more clearly than ever, exactly what I nearly lost through my own failure to properly investigate before acting on assumption and manipulated evidence." Elena studied him carefully, weighing his words against the months of pain and uncertainty she had endured, against the strength and independence she had discovered within herself while building new alliances and uncovering truth despite every obstacle placed before her. She was no longer the same woman who had been so devastatingly cast aside months earlier, and any path forward with Damien would need to acknowledge that fundamental transformation. "I'm willing to consider rebuilding trust," she said finally, "but it will require patience and genuine demonstration of change, not simply words offered in the aftermath of Seraphine's exposure. I've learned throughout these past months that I possess strength and capability I never fully recognized before, and I won't return to a position where my voice and judgment are dismissed so easily again, regardless of how convincing false evidence might appear." Damien nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "I would expect nothing less. If anything, watching you these past months, investigating and uncovering truth despite every obstacle, building alliances with Mara and Felix and others who recognized your worth even in exile, has shown me exactly how much I underestimated your strength and capability, even during our years together before Seraphine's arrival. The path toward genuine reconciliation would prove neither swift nor simple," Elena understood. But standing in the garden where their bond had first been formed, she felt something like cautious hope beginning to take root alongside the vindication she had finally achieved. Trust, once so thoroughly shattered, could not be restored through a single conversation or public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but perhaps, given time and consistent demonstration of genuine change, something new and stronger might eventually grow from the wreckage Seraphine had left behind. In the months that followed, Silverwood gradually rebuilt itself under leadership tempered by hard lessons learned through devastating betrayal. Nathan Reed, drawing on the evidence gathered during the investigation, established new protocols requiring thorough verification before any accusation could lead to exile or punishment, ensuring no future Luna or pack member would face condemnation based on evidence as easily fabricated as that which had nearly destroyed Elena's life and reputation. Grace continued serving the pack with the same dedication and courage she had demonstrated throughout the investigation, eventually earning formal recognition among the pack elders for her contributions to uncovering Seraphine's deception. Charlotte and Mara maintained their settlement near the silver mines, though regular communication now flowed freely between their community and Silverwood. The barriers that had once separated exiled wolves from established pack territories gradually dissolving through the trust built during their shared investigation. Felix returned periodically to Silverwood for formal diplomatic visits, the alliance forged through shared experience with Seraphine's manipulation, strengthening into genuine partnership between their two territories, a relationship built on the kind of honest communication that had been so notably absent during the crisis that had nearly destroyed both their pack's stability. As for Seraphine herself, reports occasionally filtered back to Silverwood of a woman matching her description, attempting to establish herself within distant territories, though word of her documented history now traveled quickly between allied packs, ensuring her calculated methods found increasingly limited success. Whatever became of her ultimately, she never again managed to inflict the kind of devastating deception she had nearly achieved at Silverwood, the truth Elena had fought so desperately to uncover, serving as protection for other packs against the same manipulation that had once nearly destroyed everything Elena held dear. Standing once more in the great hall of Silverwood, nearly a year after the devastating night when Damien had torn the Luna seal from her wrist before the entire assembled pack, Elena felt the weight of everything she had endured and overcome, settling into something resembling peace. The silver mark had been restored to her wrist during a quiet ceremony months earlier, not with the fanfare of her original binding, but with the solemn recognition of trust, carefully rebuilt through patience, honesty, and mutual commitment to never again allow manipulation to threaten what they had worked so hard to reconstruct. The pack that gathered around her now understood, in ways they had not before Seraphine's calculated deception nearly destroyed their community, exactly how fragile trust could prove when tested by clever manipulation, and exactly how precious genuine loyalty and honest leadership remained once properly valued and protected. Elena had emerged from exile not simply vindicated, but transformed, carrying forward the hard-won wisdom that truth, however deeply buried or fiercely contested, would always eventually find its way home to those determined enough to seek it.